With summer right around the corner, we have some things to look forward to. Hot days, cool nights, carnivals hopefully not similar to the one in tonight's video. A lot of memories to be had. Tonight I will be telling 3 stories. A huge thank you to the writers. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, a like and a comment is always appreciated. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. Let's just say my life sucks right now. I lost my job a week ago, and my girlfriend left me for some jerk online the week before that. And now, I'm trapped inside my bedroom because there is a machete-wielding psychopath outside my door. He's been there for 18 hours now, yet he hasn't broken down my door. I'm 100% certain he is waiting for me to surrender. I also can't escape on my own or call for help. My phone is in the living room because I, being the low IQ meat sack I am, left it charging in there earlier yesterday while I was watching TV. I also have no landline in my room because I never decided to install one in there. And as the cherry on top, I have no window in my own bedroom. Don't ask me how. I didn't build this house. I've tried reaching my friends and family on my computer through Skype, Discord, email, etc., but no one has responded. How no one has acknowledged my messages, I don't know. This situation and the events before it are so mind-boggling to me. It's so unbelievable, yet it's true. Let me explain how I ended up like this. I have loved video games since I was a young child. I used to play for enjoyment, but now I use it as a coping mechanism. I don't like to drink. So this is my solution for that. It may seem weird for a guy in his 20s to play video games as a way to cope with his woes, but I do so because it gives me a temporary escape from reality. It's like when you are reading a good book, or watching a movie. Entertainment helps you enter a fictional realm in your mind, allowing you a short reprieve from real-life struggles. That's basically how video games were for me. My favorite genre of games has always been horror. That, in my opinion, gave the best escape for me. I was put into a scary situation whenever I played, making me forget about the real world since I had to focus on the game, in order to not get scared and or die. I've also always loved getting the adrenaline rush that came with being scared. So anyways, last night, I was browsing through Steam to see what new games were out. My bank account was dwindled since I lost my job, and while it still has enough money to get by, I have to live off the cheap stuff in order to survive. So for now, I am stuck playing games that are either free or extremely cheap. I was scrolling through the list of games when my eyes landed on a game I had never heard of before. It was called Escape at All Costs. It had a small description and I skimmed over it. The gist of it was this: your car is broken down and your phone is dead. You are stranded in the woods in the middle of the night. You hear a man yell to you. You turn and see a large man with a machete in his hands. He isn't here to help you. He is here to make you his next victim. Escape at all costs. I'll be honest, it sounded really stupid. Its concept was so cliche that I came very close to buying a better game for $4.99. However, I decided to download it and try it. It was free after all. There's no harm in trying it. I did notice that there were no reviews of the game, but I glossed over it. It was probably a recently released game that hadn't gotten much attention yet. The first weird occurrence happened almost immediately. When the game started up, instead of a main menu or flashes on the screen showing the title or name of the developers, the game just started right up. I have never played a game where there wasn't a main menu startup. It was odd, but I just kind of ignored it. It started with a brief cutscene of a man, in first-person mode, driving his car down a dirt road in the middle of the woods at night. His car then makes noises, and slowly comes to a halt. He gets out of his car and pops the hood. As he is inspecting the engine, a "hey" can be heard in the background. The character turns to his right and sees a man holding, as expected, a machete. The killer charges him, swinging his machete but missing. The character then turns and runs in the opposite direction. I want to point out that the first-person view was really wonky. It was as if someone was filming with a GoPro strapped to their head. Also, it looked like actual real-life footage. The main character, the one whose eyes I was viewing out of, had real-looking features. It didn't look computer-generated. I know I am describing it weird, but it was something along those lines. After the cutscene, I am then given control of the character. The controls were given to me in white font in the upper section of the screen. After that, an instruction covered the center of the screen for a few seconds. In large, red letters, it read, "Escape at all costs." Alright, challenge accepted. I initially ran around the map for a good 10 minutes. I was hoping I would have some more insight on where to go, or what I needed to do in order to escape. I thought that maybe there were more details in the pause menu, so I tried to pause the game, except no key brought up a pause menu. That's odd, I thought to myself. I then tried to find a way to quit the game, thinking that the pause menu not coming up could be a glitch. I hit the escape key, only for nothing to happen. I then tried hitting Ctrl-Alt-Delete, and then a red-lettered message popped up again in the center of the screen. That is not how you escape. Don't try that again, or you'll surely regret it. Okay. This developer had way too much fun designing this game. It was creepy, sure, but also a smart move in a sense. It did add to the horror effect of it, in my opinion. Why not make it scarier by making the player actually try and complete the game, or die trying? With that in mind, I decided to trudge forward and beat the game. I ran around in circles for at least another 20 minutes, looking for anything that could help progress the game. After a few more minutes, I found a tree lying on its side. As I walked closer toward it, I saw something etched into the wood of the trunk. It was a heart, and within it were two names engraved into the wood. It read, Jessica and Terrence. When I saw that, I sat up in my chair and stared in awe for a solid minute. Let me explain why. I live in a small cabin-like house on the outskirts of town, since I didn't want to live in a crummy apartment. Sadly, it was the only thing within my budget. I'm surrounded by trees, and my closest neighbor is a fifth of a mile down the street. Needless to say, I am almost completely isolated. There was a tree knocked down not long ago. I found it while I was jogging out in the woods a month or two ago. I don't know how it fell down, but I do know that there was an inscription on it. It was a heart with the names Jessica and Terrence contained within. I mean, what are the chances of that? I thought it was a coincidence, but the shape of the heart and the way the names were inscribed were identical to the ones in the game. But as I looked around, I realized the layout looked familiar. Too familiar. The number of bushes here, the number of trees there, and even a small pond nearby. And then it hit me. These are the woods I live in. At first I thought that was awesome. The game developers used the woods as a model for their game. That was pretty cool, since my town has literally nothing going on 99% of the time. Wait, if this is the woods, then does that mean my house is here, in the game? Screw it, might as well look and see if it is. I made the character sprint several hundred yards, and after a couple of minutes, I saw an object in the distance. It was a house, my house to be precise. This is seriously so cool. I thought as I moved the character closer to the house, my house is in a video game, how cool is that? The character reached the front door of my house, and finally, a new instruction popped up. Press K to kick open door. I obeyed. Not even a millisecond later, I heard a massive bang coming from my front door. I darted out of my bedroom and ran down the hall to my front door. The door was being kicked in, and was already close to falling off its hinges. There were only 2 or 3 bangs before I reached the door, so whoever was kicking down my door must have been extremely strong. I ran back to my room and locked the door. The character on screen was still kicking in the door, even though I had stopped pressing K. I tried to power off my computer. When I hit the power button, a new message popped up. You can't escape us. The door finally broke down, and the character panned the front room. What I saw made me want to vomit. The whole room was set as exactly as to how it is set now. Every picture frame, piece of furniture, even my shoes were set exactly as they are in real life. Even worse, the pictures in the frames were the same pictures in real life. Pictures of my parents, my ex, they were all there. I was then jump scared by the killer's face filling the screen. The killer threw my character to the ground and then mercilessly slashed him to death. I heard the screams of the character, but not from my speakers. They were coming from outside of my bedroom. The screen went black, and a final message popped up before the game crashed and exited back to desktop. It simply read, "He could not escape at all costs. Can you, Jordan? That's what happened last night. I've been in here for about 18 hours now. The scariest part about all of this, though, is that when I looked up this game online, nothing came up. No reviews, no YouTube videos, nothing. It didn't even come up on a Steam search. It's as if the game immediately disappeared the moment I downloaded it. How could this be possible? How could someone have broken into my house the second I pressed K, then was murdered the same time as on screen? How did it know the layout of the inside of my house, and even my name? That is what I've been trying to understand for the last 18 hours. The killer, or whatever that thing is still in my house. It's just waiting for me to leave. It hasn't even spoken at all. It has just made grunting and moaning type sounds. If someone I know is reading this, please send help. I have to escape at all costs. The circus just appeared one day, perched in the parking lot behind the mall. Hand-painted signs cropped up overnight like gaudy weeds, displaying sneering clowns and roaring tigers. The largest circus on earth, one night only. Flyers covered the walls at school, were stuffed into every mailbox. I left tire streaks through a pile of them as Gaz and I raced to the beach. Wherever I looked, brightly colored papers merged with the dead leaves swirling through the air. Printed with a portrait of a cheerful-looking man wearing a goofy top hat. Well, Sean, this might be your best shot. Gaz cackled as our bikes hit sand, and we began to slow down. How are your cartwheels? I kicked some sand up at him, which only made him laugh harder. Gaz was always giggling about something. It was part of the reason we clicked so well. No one else could stand him. Come on, imagine covering up that disaster on your head with a rainbow wig. The girls would just die, he shrieked. Keep laughing, I told him. I might just consider it. To be honest, I really was considering it. I had been planning, half seriously, on running away from home, and joining a circus didn't sound half bad. I was 16 at the time, bored to death by small-town living, and aching to leave my parents in the dust. Did I have a plan? No. But I was fueled by Home Alone-style stories of kids making it in the city with a credit card and common sense. Plus, I could do a pretty good cartwheel. Wow, half the school must be out here, Gaz observed, shaking me from my musings. I followed his gaze to the party happening near the water. He was right. Even in the fading light, there were a lot of faces I recognized. A few upperclassmen approached us when we got closer, hunched over like cartoon bodybuilders. Are you two supposed to be here? The bigger one asked. We glanced at each other. You don't know us. That's Raygun. I gestured towards Gaz, club president. And this is Jazzwipe, vice club president, Gaz wheezed. Lisa invited us. That's the other reason we clicked so well. Ever since we'd met, we'd been playing this game. Coming up with the dumbest fake names we could think of whenever we met new people. Whoever's cover got blown first had to buy the other one a soda. Stupid, I know, but it had got me a lot of sodas too. The guys let us pass without comment, and we merged with the crowd of kids on the beach. I was surprised at how many of them were talking about the circus. Even the bro circle had supplemented their usual conversation about girls, with the girls at the circus. You know how they are. It was very scientific. Gaz and I threw around a few more pseudonyms for fun, but most people were too drunk or preoccupied to call either of us out. Each time we saw the guys from earlier, we pretended to be looking for Lisa until they passed. I guess they were the designated guards or something. At some point I lost Gaz to the horde of swaying teens. In between songs I could hear his stupid, shrieking laughter, which made me feel pretty sorry for whoever he'd made his next victim. Abandoned, I peeled off a little and sat on a piece of driftwood overlooking the water. It was really getting dark now, so much so that I didn't even notice the two girls that sat beside me until they spoke. What's your name? They said in unison, scaring me half to death. Nickel forward. I mumbled, looking helplessly between them. I noticed immediately that they were twins, long strands of black hair framed identical pale faces. Too pale, like they were wearing face paint. My eyes fixated on the frilly tutus around their waists. and the striped stockings that clung to their legs. You guys go to Garfield High? Actually, my sister and I belong to the circus, said the one on the right. We open tomorrow night, said the one on the left. Oh yeah, everyone's talking about it. We don't get a lot of excitement around here. Must suck getting stuck with promotion, right? They looked at me strangely. Lefty spoke first. No, we wanted to come out here. We thought a party looked like fun. It's been so long since we've hung out with kids our own age. Her sister shot her a look and she shut up. Righty finished. She means that we've just been so busy. It's hard to get out much, you know? But you really should come, what did you say your name was? I'd forgotten my alias. Classic. But just before I gave myself away, I felt a hand touch down on my shoulder. This right here is the Great Forest Woods. No relation to Tiger. Gaz giggled. Sorry you ladies had to deal with him. He's real broody, isn't he? He plopped down between Lefty and me, nearly knocking her off the seat. Righty frowned, silent accusations hardening her features. No, I thought it was something else. Her gaze burned into me. Her eyes seemed bigger than before. A foreign shame entered my bloodstream, like when your mom catches you doing something wrong. For a second, that's exactly how I felt. Like a little kid, caught in a lie. I almost told her my real name, but her sister beat me to the punch. Anyway, it was really nice meeting you two. Hopefully we'll see you at the circus tomorrow. I watched them walk back up the beach, towards the main road. Gaz whistled a bit, then broke out in a fit of laughter. Usually the sound was mildly annoying, but the party was starting to thin, and the bonfire was being put out. And my friend's wild, high-pitched wails were more unnerving than anything else. If you had told me the next Olympics were going to feature competitive shark wrestling, that would have been more believable than what my parents said at breakfast the next morning. Have you seen the circus up by the mall, Daryl? My mom chirped. Yeah, me and the boys were talking about it at work yesterday. I was thinking we could go see what it's about. As a family, you know? Admission is free. That's how they were, even though I was sitting right there, slurping up cereal. They talked like I wasn't even in the room. I cleared my throat loudly, twice. You alright, Sean? I hope you're not getting sick. I'm fine, Mom. And since when are you and Dad into circuses? My real question was, since when are you and Dad into anything? They shrugged. It looks like fun. Plus a couple lovely girls stopped by the other night to give us flyers. They said it'd be very educational. My mom said. I tried not to choke on my cereal. I tried to tell myself that they'd probably just gone door to door. It wasn't like they'd sought out my house specifically. It wasn't even possible. Still, I couldn't shake the dread that crept into my fingertips and made the spoon too heavy to lift. Did you tell them anything? My dad scoffed. They're not cops, Sean. We just said that we'd love to come see their show. Your mother even gave them one of her famous cupcakes. But, no buts. We're going to have a nice family evening, and you're not getting out of it. The light in the kitchen seemed to die out, as if on cue. A stray flyer fluttered past the window. I watched it with a frown. At that point, I made up my mind that I was going to run away. For real. And if I had to go to this thing, maybe I really could take advantage of it. Even if they were just looking for someone to clean out the elephant pen. I turned back to my parents. Can I bring Gaz? They groaned loudly, which I took to mean yes. Through hours of hostage crisis level negotiation, it was agreed that Gaz and I would ride our bikes to the circus and meet my parents in the stands. Actually, his parents were going too, but they were more than happy to dump their son with us. Sometimes I felt kind of bad for him, to be honest, but he didn't seem to mind. On our way there, I told him about the girls, and got a similar story back from him. I was relieved. They'd gone door to door after all. I also told him my plan to skip town, which admittedly wasn't much of a plan. Really, I was just going to ask the ringmaster for a job after the show, and hope for the best. Like I said, I was running on movie magic. Gaz told me my plan was stupid, and then immediately offered to help. His job was to distract my parents. He was a good friend. When we arrived, the parking lot was swarming with people. The entire town must have been there. Dead leaves and flyers choked the air. The smell of cotton candy and popcorn replaced any oxygen, making me dizzy. Above us, the big top loomed. red and white stripes tapering into a sharp point at the top, with dozens of cheap carnival games scattered around it. A few dirty-looking clowns patrolled the games, handing fluffy toys with big, gloved hands. I tried to picture myself as one of them and felt sick, but still, I was determined. Gaz and I parked our bikes and walked up to the Ticketmaster. "Names?" he said. "Midsummer Shyamalan." Gaz giggled. "And this is my buddy." But before he could invent a name for me, I interrupted him. "Josh Grant," I blurted out. I still don't know why I said it. I don't know why I played it safe. I just know that something deep inside me told me that I needed to be convincing. The Ticketmaster nodded at me, wrote the name on a shiny ticket, and passed it through the window. Then he narrowed his eyes at my friend. "Your real name?" Gaz glared at me, then said very slowly, "Garrison Fields." We had this rule, see, that if your cover got blown, you had to give up your real name. It was supposed to be a punishment, like giving away a piece of yourself. I think about this rule a lot. I think about this moment a lot. "You're a jerk. You know that, right?" Gaz punched me in the arm as we walked into the tent. "That doesn't count. You have to earn your soda." I just nodded, trying to shake away the fog of carnival confections. We met up with my parents, and the show quickly began. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the largest circus on earth. Our members are very pleased to see your faces, but be advised, there will be audience participation." A troupe of clowns danced into the ring, breaking out into cruel laughter and honking their tiny horns. I guess the gag was that they were prisoners or slaves or something, because of the comically large shackles attached to their legs. Whenever the ringmaster approached them, they all made a big show of screaming and cowering behind each other. At one point, the ringmaster pulled out a whip and pretended to hit them with it. I flinched at the sounds of it snapping in the air, but the audience was eating it up. Even my parents were howling with laughter, slapping their thighs as they watched. I forced a chuckle from my lips, suddenly very self-conscious. Finally, the clowns retreated and were replaced by ballet dancers. I recognized the twins among them, leading the rest of the performers. Only, not everyone was in costume. In fact, most of the dancers were dressed like suburbanites, or wearing business clothes. Ages ranged from ancient to elementary schoolers, all moving together. One older woman tripped and landed face first on the floor, where she was trampled by her teammates. Gaz was doubled over in hysterics behind me. I felt sick. I kept waiting for her to get up. She looked so frail, white, and withered. One of the twins looked back at her, and she finally picked herself up. She rejoined the dance, and I tried to laugh at the way her legs bent awkwardly backwards. By the halfway point, I was rethinking my plans. Short-skirted vendors prowled the stands, offering sugary snacks. "And what's your name, cutie?" Josh Grant." A tub of cotton candy was shoved into my lap. I placed a clump of it in my mouth and almost gagged. It was stale, sour, but when I turned to complain, the vendors had already moved on. I looked around. My parents were sharing a large tub of popcorn, except they weren't really eating it. No one was really eating. Hands dug into containers and brought the contents to laughing lips, only to have them fall right out of their mouth and onto the floor. I watched Gaz grind cotton candy into his teeth, unable to stop giggling long enough to chew. My head was light, and I looked back at my own container and gasped. The pink treat was gone, replaced by a thin layer of black mud and a pile of dead leaves. I touched my fingers to my lips, and they came away black. Now I really did gag. "Dude, something's wrong." I shook Gaz by his shoulders. "I think we should ditch." But he just kept laughing, not even looking at me. "Gaz, come on. I'm being serious." Below us, a dozen or so men were eating fire, or trying to anyway. "Gaz." I shoved him, hard. His skull made a sharp thud on the wooden bench, but he just kept cackling like an idiot. Tears rolled down his face. His cheeks were red. White fingers clutched at his side, but he kept going, glued to the action. My parents were in the same state. Everyone was. I wanted to stand up and scream, "What's so funny?" But a cold fist formed in my stomach and kept me still, kept me quiet. The show continued. I have to be honest, It really was the largest circus on Earth. Thousands of people dragged themselves through various stunts and tricks, but it was as if they hadn't been trained on any of it. There were no costumes, no one was smiling. The magician wept as he cut a woman in half. No box or anything. "I'm sorry," he kept mouthing. "I'm sorry." And the smell of blood joined the tango of sugar and butter. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't watch. But a pair of clowns was guarding every exit. For some reason I felt like I was being monitored, trying to stop the wetness in my eyes. I dunked a fist into my tub of dead leaves and flung them at my mouth, allowing them to stick to my chin. I laughed at the horror in front of me, until my cheeks hurt. Rocked back and forth in my seat, tried to stop looking around. The smell of urine wafted up, and I noticed the man in the seat below mine had pissed himself. Not that he seemed to mind. Finally, after hours, the ringmaster made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for audience participation." He held a box of shiny tickets. "When I call your ticket, come on down." The room was silent. I don't mean people stopped laughing, because they didn't, but it was like their voices simply went quiet. Holden Deere, Felicity Chambers, Gabby Days. I watched people suddenly jerk onto their feet, staggering towards the center stage with shaky, lurching steps. A parade of toddlers, or puppets. David Brown, Daryl Connors, Linda Connors. My parents stood up. I couldn't help myself. I threw my body at them, holding onto their legs like a little kid, begging them not to go. A few clowns looked in our direction, but I ignored them. "Mom, Dad, please. Please don't you get it? Something's wrong with these people. We have to go home now." But they kicked me off with a superhuman strength. I flew back into Gaz, whose face was still contorted into silent laughter. Garrison Fields. "No, no, please, you can't." I screamed in his ear. For the smallest fraction of a second, I swear he looked at me. I'll never forget the pain in his eyes, the fear, and then he stumbled down towards the ring. Everyone dead. Josh Grant. I stood up. For a moment the world worked in slow motion. I watched my family march through the ring. A girl, one of the twins, handed my dad a clown nose. Another one was showing my mother how to dance, lazily, very stupidly. I noticed several pairs of twins doing the same to the rest of the crowd. Several pairs of the same twins. One handed Gaz a flaming baton. The ringmaster smiled up at me, then frowned as I stood motionless. His eyes seemed too big, his features too sharp. "That's not my name." I screeched at the top of my lungs. Then I ducked my head and ran through the stands, through the red and white curtains that felt coarse and dry against my skin, out into the parking lot, where I pounced on my bike and hurtled down the main road, screaming and crying and trying to remember how to breathe. I waited for my parents the rest of the night, uselessly of course. I waited to hear the sounds of cars starting up. I waited to hear familiar voices, all uselessly. Stacks of flyers were blown against my windows, face up. One night only. I screamed to break the silence. Largest circus on Earth. The next morning I pedaled back to the mall, not knowing what I was expecting. The place was deserted. No tent, no games, no ticket booth. Just rows upon rows of parked cars and overturned bicycles. A thin layer of dead leaves blanketed the ground where the big top had been. I stood there for a long time, unable to comprehend the bitter irony of it all. I had planned to join the circus, but everyone else had instead. The realization slackened my knees. A wild, hysterical giggle burst from my lips. "No." I mumbled between peals of laughter. "No, no, no." I sank to the ground, shaking. This isn't happening. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at the spot where everyone in my town had been taken. I don't know how long I waited for some sign of life. And I don't know when the laughter turned into sobs. I've wanted to tell this story for a while now, but never really wanted to bring it into the light. I would like to enlighten the masses of a story that happened to me, and has more than confirmed the supernatural for me and my father. The best way to start this story is with the beginning of that day, to catch you all up. It was Saturday morning and I was packing up my stuff from my dorm to head back home for the first time in over a month. I had missed my dad, and just wanted to hang back home for the rest of the weekend. My childhood home was about a 50-minute drive from my college, so I didn't get there until around 2 in the afternoon. My dad hadn't gotten off work yet, so I just threw my stuff on my sister's bed, plopped down, and started watching Dexter, my favorite show during that time. Notice how I said my sister's bed. That's because when I moved to college I gave my room to my brother, and his room was filthy and hot, so I chose to sleep on my sister's bed, because it was cooler and she was at my mom's for the weekend. The day goes by fast, and my dad got off around 4ish. He was very tired, so we got ready and went out for dinner. Afterwards we headed back home early, so he could get to bed. We both laid down around 10, which was early for me, so I got back to watching Dexter. I watched like 3 episodes and scrolled through social media in between episodes, until my eyes started to get heavy. Before putting my phone down, I set my alarms for church the next morning, and noticed the time was after 2, and I knew I needed to get some sleep, so I passed out immediately after. Now I would like to pause the story to give you a layout of my father's house. When I described it to my friends, I'd like to compare it to a donut, not because it's round, but because once you enter the front door, you are in the living room, then it opens into the dining room, then the kitchen, my dad's bedroom, bathroom, brother's room, then back to the living room. So each room has 2 doors that connect to the adjacent room. By walking around my whole house, you would be walking in a circle. Because my sister moved out from my mom's, we had to renovate the dining room into her bedroom. Now that you know the importance of my home's layout, let's get to the stuff that changes how I perceive scary movies forever. I had just fallen asleep, and had woken up to a noise I can only describe as ground shattering, because that's what it sounded like was happening. I compare it to having a professional baseball player taking a bat and swinging it over and over at the floor underneath me. I didn't know what was happening, but I was so tired, and my dad has a history of punching walls and doors when he is having trouble with the women in his life. It sounds like my dad is an abusive man, but he's not. He never lays a hand on a woman, just has anger issues, and takes it out on the house for some reason. So I thought he was having another episode, and went back to sleep easily with that assumption. I'd say another 20 minutes pass, and this time it was 10 times louder. It was horrible to hear, and now I was convinced it was coming from the floor underneath me. I stared blankly at the floor, while my eyes adjusted to the pitch black room around me. I was scared and angry at the same time. Part of me was scared because I thought my dad would never be able to make a noise so horrifying, and the other part of me was mad because if my dad was making this noise, I was losing sleep for his ignorant actions. And just when my eyes had adjusted only like 30 seconds since that last banging, I hear footsteps come from my dad's room, and they are stomping on the old wooden floor very loud. For a second I thought maybe that was the noise, but trying to think rationally here was not going to bode well for me, because just then my dad enters the room with a very angry, tired face. He begins to yell at me saying, "Son, what are you banging on?" And I knew he was serious, and it was not him making these disturbing noises. Then I replied with a very shaky voice and said, "But Dad, I thought it was you." I could feel my eyes watering up, because the fear was settling in, and my father must have seen it too, because he just looked at me confused, and I could tell he was sorry for yelling and assuming it was me. We stared at each other emotionless and baffled for maybe 2 seconds, but felt like 20 minutes. Then, just as I finished my sentence, as if it, whatever it was, heard my father yelling and decided to retaliate with 3 more bangs that sent shivers down my spine. The sound was so demonic and horrifying. There's no denying that we both heard the horrendous noise, and its origin was right in the middle of us beneath the floor. My father looked down, and looked back up at me with a glowing pale face, and walked back to his room silently. He showed no comfort for me, and no reaction at all to the noise happening in the room where I was. He just left me as if the noise scared him so badly, it sucked all emotion from him. Left to face it myself, I slowly checked my phone and it was 3:31, and I was dead tired. Like my eyes were burning because I was so tired. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew my dad was on one knee, beside me, gently waking me up. I sat up with a jerk, because I still felt the fear from last night. My dad, with tears in his eyes, said, Son, I don't know how to put this, but you know that sound we heard last night? I shook my head, then he went on. I went down to the crawl space to see what could have made that noise underneath the dining room floor. And just to get down there, I had to get out a shovel to dig dirt up from around the door, because the house had sank over time. I also had to cut down multiple vines that had grown over the door. I crawled as close as I could to the point where the noise came from, but just as I figured there was no way any animal or person could get there, because there's only about a foot from the floor to the ground. I had thought this too, because our house sat on a hill, and when I've been down there before, you can only walk, head ducking, for like 3 feet before it gradually gets shorter until the front of the house is actually touching the ground. I could tell where my dad was going with this, and he didn't need to convince me. I had come to my conclusion once he said the door was that hard to get opened. Since the door was the only possible way to get under the house, and that no living thing could have made such a loud noise with only a foot of room to work with. My dad continued. Son, you know I've never believed in anything supernatural or spiritual, but I am completely convinced that what happened last night was something supernatural. With his face just as pale as last night, he got up and walked away. I was relieved and terrified all at once. I had been trying to tell my dad something was off about the house for years, but he always blew it off, and in a way I guess I had been too. But there was no denying what happened was real. I still asked him almost monthly to repeat the events back to me. It's my way of keeping myself from pushing it off as something imagined. But nevertheless, my father tells the story the exact same way I have for you today, but probably with less grammatical errors. I no longer try to convince people the paranormal is real. I just simply say, when something paranormal happens to you, you will know. P.S. My dad is some kind of supernatural nut now, and has done some research and believes that because of all the negative energy in the house over the years, the fighting, the divorce, drugs, and even a death, happened before we owned the house, made it possible for a dark entity to latch onto it. What we heard that night was probably an entity making itself known. He used the 3 sets of 3 to support this theory, because there were 3 separate bangs, and each time it happened was in a series of 3. My dad has researched, and it's supposed to be a knock, or insult to the Holy Trinity. I do recall the sets of 3, but I guess this last part is more food for thought than anything.
Number 1. Bad cop. No donut. I'm not anti-law enforcement. I get along well with police. I've known several who were exceptionally good people. My worst police experience as a teen, being mischievous, and hit a cop with a water balloon in the dark thinking it was one of my friends. Big oops. He lectured me and took me home. He remained a family friend for decades. All of them are people, like all of us, but after a trip out of state, I have to wonder if some aren't demons. I went from Utah to New Mexico to pick up my mom because she was having a hard time living alone at age 79, and it was planned that when the time came, she would live with me. My husband was 100 miles ahead of us with a U-Haul truck full of her belongings. I was driving her Nissan car with her 2 fur babies riding in the back seat in their carriers. The cats were seatbelted in and covered with a blanket. We laughed and joked all the way, even stopped over at a souvenir shop because we knew we wouldn't be back again. We drove for hours so far, a smooth trip. We stopped in Gallup, Navajo Reservation land, for gas and snacks. It was nearly 1 a.m. When I parked at the gas pump, a Navajo man appeared at the car window, holding a cloth with silver and turquoise jewelry and beaded items. He wouldn't let me open the car door until I rolled the window down half an inch and negotiated for his cheapest item and stuffed $10 through the window. He couldn't stuff the necklace through a space that small, and hung the necklace on the car antenna and walked away to sit with his buddy at a picnic table near the convenience store door. Mom and I looked at each other and debated if we had enough gas to get to the next gas station. I hurried and filled up the tank and left ASAP. It felt creepy. We were the only customers in the middle of nowhere late at night, and we didn't feel safe. Glad to be on the road again, we were still talking about the spooky guy and calming down from being shook up. He had a threatening look and mannerisms that suggested telling him no thanks would have been a bad decision, and I felt bullied to buy his goods. I told myself to just buy anything and he might go away. It was cloudy and seemed extra dark. No other traffic on the highway but us through miles of desert. No businesses, no nothing but coyotes, buzzards, and sagebrush, and lots of stray dogs. The dark night was suddenly lit up by a blinding light. I couldn't see anything, not even the lines on the road. Mom joked that aliens were about to abduct us. New Mexico is famous for the Roswell aliens. My guess was it was some rednecks with a sixer who were bored or highway robbers. We were both wrong. We entered the twilight zone. The large vehicle hovered very close to our back bumper, deliberately blinding me with a set of extremely bright lights pointed at me. I was driving 65, the exact speed limit. The truck followed for miles before deciding to pass me. Thank God. However, as he passed, he pointed his spotlight at me and kept blinding me. The side of his door said, "Sheriff." We had a bad feeling about this and decided he was just checking us out to see if we looked like we were outlaws. Mom called us Thelma and Louise. I told her that we weren't that far out from the Grand Canyon. Mom's humor was similar to Sophia of the Golden Girls. Mom was a cynical redhead, like mother, like daughter. I tried to be calm and act normal, and make no mistakes to give him a reason to pull us over. In the news for the past several weeks, Mom told me there was a serial rapist cop in that area of New Mexico. I thought she was joking, but she swore she wasn't. This cop wasn't acting right. He didn't want to pull us over. He wanted to scare us. I told my mom to get my phone and call 911 to see why an officer would be interested in us and describe what he was doing. No service. Instead of passing, he was driving along the side of us, not passing. He was shining his brightest lights directly in my face, making it nearly impossible to drive. I know if I pulled over I might regret it, and had to keep us safe. I joked that things come in threes, so what next? We looked at each other and said, "We crash." We tried not to laugh and look at the road. We were calming ourselves and each other with our jokes, but we were truly afraid. He dropped back and got behind me again, following much too closely with horrible bright lights. I was prepared to be pulled over, but he didn't turn on his red and blue lights. For several more miles he stayed behind me and made it dangerous to try to drive. We asked each other all the questions only the crazy guy could answer. Why is he doing this? What's wrong with him? Was it something we did? Mostly we discussed what we should do. We didn't have a lot of options. We planned to stop at the next open business. As suddenly as he lit up our night, he turned off all of his lights. He vanished in the dark. We weren't sure he would pop up again, and it took a long time to feel like we had got away. He had followed us for 25 miles. I trembled for the next 200 miles. I wanted to talk to the sheriff department after I was sure we were safe and ask what the actual just happened. We decided to just be grateful it wasn't worse. We weren't harmed, but shook as hell. We wondered if that wasn't the road cop in the news. And we were so glad we were together and not driving alone. Plan A would have meant we each would drive a vehicle, but when we needed another driver, Plan B, my husband volunteered and towed our car, so we would drive together in her car. The highway we were on was 666, until they changed the number. Did I beat the devil on Highway 666? I'm glad I won't be going back there. Ever. Close call. In 1985, I lived on the Mesa in Santa Barbara, California. Across the street from my home was a mini shopping center with a small grocery store, a lumber store, and a dentist's office. Kim Morgan, a college student, was kidnapped from there after agreeing to meet her abductor under false pretense. She had placed an ad seeking a room in exchange for doing housework and babysitting. There were several witnesses who saw them together, and her car was found there on the day she disappeared. There were sketches of the man in the papers and on the news. He was very distinct, and so was his car. Her photo was also in the news. 3 days after Kim was taken, I was walking to the corner and took a shortcut across the shopping center parking lot. I did this all the time, but today was different. A car, matching the description of the wanted car, cut me off, and a man, matching the description of the wanted man, offered me a ride. I recognized the man and the car from the sketches in the news, and tried to act like I didn't notice. I said I didn't need a ride because I was near where I was going. He insisted that he drive me there. I pointed at the dentist's office and said, "I'm already to my destination." The man became angry and told me he'd drive me. I walked away behind his car and made a point to look at his license plate as I walked 30 steps to the dentist's office. I wanted to run, but had to walk calmly. I entered the office and told the receptionist to call the cops because Kim Morgan's kidnapper just tried to get me into his car. The lady looked out the window to see his car leaving the driveway. Dr. Bartels was my dentist, and everyone there knew me. I forgot the license plate number before I got into the office. The police were called, and I gave all the info I had. At their suggestion, I didn't continue my journey to the fast food place in the next shopping center, and didn't go back home in case he was watching nearby. The police were going to have to take me home, but they didn't want to show the man where I lived. The plan was to stay in their waiting room until my mom could pick me up after work. I was very shook up and creeped out. There was no doubt it was the same man. I felt lucky to have had the presence of mind to act calm and get into the nearest business for help. Mom picked me up almost 3 hours later, and we went home. I was grateful to the staff, who stayed 45 minutes past closing time, but they locked the door at 5 for safety. Mom watched the news every evening. 2 days after she had picked me up at the dentist's office, a shocking top story chilled me to the core. Some of Kim Morgan's dismembered remains were found in the Los Padres forest, less than 10 miles from my home. There was another shock to me because I often rode my bike on the forest roads. I'd pack a lunch and make a day of it. I was feeling lucky that I didn't cross paths with him because I doubt I could have gotten away. There were similar murders that summer, and the possibility the man was a serial killer. He was never caught. Hi, I'm a subscriber to your YouTube channel, and I have a more creepy sleep paralysis story than scary. I had my first and only sleep paralysis thus far 2 years ago at Mars 5th. I'm a female at 25 right now, and my name is Daisy, and this sleep paralysis I had was kind of creepy and strange. I was asleep, and then I woke up by having a shadow cat looking at me and just walk around me in circles, and I couldn't move anything then, just my eyes, and every time I blinked the shadow cat had moved to another spot. It was even on my shoulders and face, and in front of me, and next to my window, and it just kept walking around me and staring at me, and then I saw a black shadow outside my window, coming closer and closer, until the shadow figure is right on my outside window, and trying to break in, and then hitting the window, and it sounds like the window is about to break every time the shadow figure hits the window. Then the shadow cat hisses at the shadow figure and pulls out its claws and scares off the shadow figure before it could get in. And then it stares at me with its claws out and then goes closer and closer to my face until it just disappeared. And then I could move again. And then the next morning I woke up. I had scratches on my cheek and hands. Number 4. The Reeker. I met W in 1988, or as KOC likes to call him today, Big W. He was a bartender at the then famous local rock club, the Tucson Garden. It had been the original Tucson Community Center, built during the 60s. It was under private ownership at the time, and was famous for headlining bands after their main shows in Tucson, or Phoenix, Los Angeles, or even as far away as Toronto. Sometimes they would do encore performances, perhaps as a tribute to their glory days, or just to have fun and party with the locals. Either way, the Garden drew customers from far away as the UK, Australia, Europe, Canada, and Mexico. The Garden had a capacity of about 2,000 people, not including those that frequented the parking lot. It had 2 bars, a 1,200 square foot dance floor, and great acoustics. I used to dance there, a regular out-of-town local girl who just moved to Tucson 4 months earlier and was out almost every night, looking for new friends and otherwise, just hanging out, and dancing to the live bands that would show up 3 nights out of the week. Me and my sisters, along with friends, were always looking to see a live show, get blasted, and have a good time. Because I didn't know a lot of people, I was hit on constantly, and usually took refuge at whichever of the 2 bars W was working at. Some of the other bartenders didn't like me going to his bar because they thought I was the one that attracted the largest crowds. But whether I was there or not, W's bar always had the largest crowds. He spent his free time, though, talking to me and always coming back to serve me my fruit slices and ice water. I appreciated that he treated me like I was just another paying customer. During the early years, we attracted some of the strangest people in some of the weirdest circumstances. I remember one time on his night off, when we decided to skip the Garden and went out to a techno club called the Wild Wild W. The DJ played mostly techno and dance and early hip-hop. W and I danced from about 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. closing time. We were drinking Wild Tea 101 without my usual sliced fruit and water. For some reason, this one door guy decided that he didn't like him. He wouldn't even let him in unless he went home and changed his clothes. But I, of course, could stay if I wanted to. I got the impression they were trying to separate us. By closing time, almost everyone else had left, but we kept going all the way to the last call. It was fun. As we were walking out, I remember the door jerk glaring at him like he could kill him. Together we had drunk almost an entire bottle of Wild Tea 101. For the better part of 6 hours, we didn't have one accident or break one beer bottle or any of the rules. Oh, and Wild Tea is the best bourbon on the planet. After we headed for home, about 1:30 a.m., southbound on I-10, 2 guys in a black, pitted for shit, 1978 Ford F-150 monster truck tried at first to tailgate us at 7 miles an hour, and then sideswipe us between lanes. The SUV they were driving was equipped with a spotlight. They used it to try to blind us so we lose control and crash. It was pretty scary. We sped up to see how fast their piece of shit truck could run. When we got it up to about 110, the Ford, shaking itself apart trying to keep up, started to fall back. But before they could completely clear off, W hit the brake so hard the Ford nearly flipped trying to get out of our way. Just as soon as they were about to regain control, though, W made a hard right, cutting across 3 lanes at about 90 miles per hour, and then up the off-ramp and across the overpass. We just managed to spot their brake lights by the time they were halfway to the next off-ramp. We found ourselves in the barrio at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. I thought of that hateful doorman. We turned into an alley with the stealthiness of a cat, the lights off, going up about 2 blocks, turning around, facing the direction we've come, and then we stopped. W rummaged under the front seat and pulled out an old Louisville Slugger. I had my 2-edged boot dagger and my trusty machete. We turned off the motor and waited. After about 10 minutes, we saw the Ford tear past the alley entrance, 2 blocks up, at about 85 miles per hour. After we were both satisfied that we'd shook him, we got back in the car, stowed the bat, and just sat there looking. Right that minute we looked like we could have come from another century entirely. We just sat there, looking at each other, and then we started to laugh. Once we started, we couldn't stop. We laughed so hard, we had to roll up the window to keep from being heard and attracting any more unwanted attention. We laughed so hard we couldn't breathe, and had to roll the window down again anyway. It was gut-wrenchingly hilarious. I still bust a gut thinking about it. Our relationship was never perfect. We had problems from the outset, and we actually split up many times over anger, petty arguments, jealousy, and pride. Sometimes we got into some pretty raucous, knock-down, drag-out fights. Our lives apart, though quieter, always gave way, eventually, to one or the other, usually me, deciding that it's time to try again. Eventually we decided that if being apart and then getting back together again was an indication of anything, it had to be that we, despite our falling out, would one day grow up and put all that aside and just be together. The last 20 years proved that to be the case. After the garden closed, and after a brief stint in San Diego, California, working for Greenpeace USA, we bicycle toured down the California coast, over the coastal mountains, across the Mojave and Sonoran deserts, and back to Tucson. We'd already decided that rather than getting an apartment or a rental house in town, we'd live out along the Santa Cruz River. Because we'd already spent about 6 months living along the California coastal beaches and the San Diego River, we were well seasoned for living out along the only river of its size to run backwards from south to north. After leaving my tortoiseshell cat, Adaro, for the time being, with my mother, we found a place far enough north to put us just outside the Tucson city limit and the Pima County's jurisdiction, so the restrictions to build and burn were considerably lax. When we chose a site, we set up to carving out a floor, walls, steps, a hearth, and below-ground caches for water and food storage. Because there was no electricity, we relied on our fire pit, devotional candles, and oil lamps for cooking, heat, and light. We built a kind of a 6-sided hogan, a Navajo hut, right out in the Sonoran Desert, surrounded by desert willow and mesquite. It proved to be safe, hidden, resilient, clean, and dry. My sister, Kugels, would have loved it. We wish she could have been there. Because the land we were on was owned by a private interest, a Japanese family out of California, we were allowed to use their still active artesian well for cleaning, bathing, cooking, and general all-over consumption. With temperatures in the triple digits for about 4 months out of the year, 40 degrees deep well water was much appreciated. We worked and lived in and around the area for about 3 years. Over time, we made some pretty interesting acquaintances of some of the locals and homeless, and even some of the migrants. They came from all over the U.S. and Mexico, and some as far away as Guatemala, Costa Rica, and Honduras. Some were on the lam, hiding out from the wants and warrants, and some were like us, wanting to live out. Most of the migrants were just looking for food, water, safety, opportunity, work, and above all, citizenship. Even in the relentless heat, the monsoons, the lightning storms, the bee swarms, the ant invasions and visits by the Sheriff's Department, the National Guard, the Tucson Police, and others, we found each other there. The monsoons were fascinating and surreal. During that time of year, from about May to August, the washes that fed the Santa Cruz would run and flood the surrounding area for miles. The fresh water making contact with the sunburnt soil and seared vegetation left a strong and appealing aroma that is impossible to forget. At such times, many of the critters and people that lived there would, once the water receded, come out to play. There were rattlesnakes, bull snakes, centipedes, scorpions, vampire beetles, spadefoot toads, ducks, geese, hawks, ravens, and once 2 migrants, a father and son, who came in sometime in the early morning and passed out under a group of mesquite trees along the now running wash across from where we built our hogan. Since it was about 5 a.m., we let them sleep and decided to make a huge pot of tuna casserole with mushroom soup, milk, sautéed brown mushrooms, sweet green peas, onions, egg noodles, butter, and 2 loaves of uncut whole wheat bread, toasted over mesquite coals with butter and strawberry jam, and of course, 2 2-liter bottles of our best artesian well water, vintage 1991, courtesy of the Japanese family that owned the entire 10 acres. When we brought it out to them, they were already awake, probably because of the heat. Neither could speak any English. We thought we heard the father say that they were from Guatemala. They ate their fill and gratefully accepted the water and what was left of the food and walked out of the area and hopefully on to a better life. One particularly hot and humid monsoon morning, I was sitting and listening to the mourning doves that frequented the area. They, along with the Gambel's quail and the occasional roadrunner, were a constant. Every morning during the summer, about 5 a.m., I would hear the soft coos, clucks, or calls. He was getting water out of one of the below-ground caches we'd built when he yelled out, "Cat, you've got to see this." He pointed to just inside the cache, between the earthen wall and the bottles. It was the first time I'd ever seen a male blonde Arizona tarantula, black legs, copper-colored carapace, and reddish-brown abdomen. The tarantula sat completely still as I reached down with my left hand, petting its abdomen with my right. Before I knew it, the huge spider slowly crawled up and onto my open palm. It was bigger than both my hands put together. It sat there completely still, while I continued petting it with my right hand. I could clearly make out its 8 black glistening orbs looking back at me, as I continued marveling at this masterpiece of nature, stroking the top of its abdomen in one direction to not disturb the hairs on its back. It did a very surprising thing. It began to push up and against my fingers like a cat. When I would rub it in exactly the right spot, it would push up and then settle back down on my open palm. Once I began to get the message anew, it would push itself up almost to the length of its legs to get a more thorough massage before settling back down on my open palm. Because we had errands to run, he said, "We'd better leave now, or we'll never get out of here." I could have played with the tarantula for the rest of the day and into the night. I placed the tarantula back onto the water cache. It reluctantly but gracefully walked down to where I'd found it earlier. It stayed with us for a few more days, until it apparently decided to retreat to one of the many burrows that dotted the landscape. Because it was laundry day, that meant taking all of our clothes to the nearest laundromat, about 2 miles by bike along the Santa Cruz River levee and 2 miles across the open desert to just this side of the Tucson city limit. Once we arrived, I started to load the washing machines with all the clothes we'd stuffed into our bike panniers. W left to go use a payphone. This was before cell phones or mobile phones. As I was loading the final dryer, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, middle-aged man approached with what looked like a glass of liquor in one hand and a crumpled-up $1 bill in the other, and asked if I had change. I told him that, unfortunately, I didn't have any to spare. My answer seemed to aggravate him. When he stepped closer, I tried to point out the change machine on the wall. That aggravated him even more. Crowding me further, I started to ask him to please step back, and for the first time, I noticed his bloodshot eyes. Between his eyes and his breath, the guy was definitely ripped. Seeing my discomfort, a slight grin played at the corners of his unshaven and vomit-reeking mouth. He seemed to be enjoying this. Starting to get angry, I, still believing in treating people with the same regard, despite one's disability, obnoxious behavior, or self-indulgence, noticed his tongue darting in and out of his mouth, licking his lips, as if he were a lizard, and I was his prey. Something to be stalked and eaten. He was apparently still in his stalking mode. As he persisted, I began to become quite agitated. Still holding his drink up in one hand, with a crumpled $1 bill in the other, I saw when his stringy blonde hair lazily fell across one eye. I remember thinking of Poe's Telltale Heart, his invasion of my personal space, and my unease began to make me angrier. I always thought of my anger as a kind of self-defense mechanism. I had used it throughout most of my life, especially after I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I held this special power, as I called it, particularly close to my heart, to only be used as a last resort. It had saved me on more than a few occasions. The situation with this guy was rapidly escalating into another one. He must have sensed something, because now he simply would not leave me alone at all. He kept pushing me further and further with his rancid breath and bloodshot eyes. Still, I maintained an outward calm, even though I was clearly wishing him miles away. It was, unfortunately for him, short-lived, because he asked another BS question, this time squarely in my face. The stench of intoxication almost made me want to vomit. I took a step back, a thing I rarely did, but the smell of his ingested liquor, curdling breath, flooded at my air intake to the point where I wanted to scream. He eyed me quizzically, taking a sip of the 110-degree backwash that was more saliva than alcohol. Because I'd already given him more attention than he deserved, he wasn't going to let me get away that easily. With that one step back, he felt suddenly emboldened, but my reaction to it made his wicked little grin fade really fast. Taken aback and seeming to have forgotten his original question, he suddenly thrust the sordid $1 bill back in my direction, like it was somehow more than enough to pay for the answer he wanted to hear. Gagging at the smell of something that was once called a drink, I once again pointed in the direction of the change machine on the wall. Angrily he snorted, "But you have more than enough." Like that and his breath were supposed to be enough. Again I repeated, "In the corner," gesturing in that direction. "Are you afraid of me?" Now that made me furious. I turned around and looked at him square in his glazed blue, bloodshot eye, bad breath or not. "I'm definitely not afraid of you. The only thing I'm afraid of right now is your horribly putrid breath and your unwanted presence. And I want you to back the fuck off, turn around, and leave me alone. And I mean now." Of course, this time he became enraged, not so much because of what I said. He probably didn't comprehend most of it anyway, as the tone and menace in my voice. He spun around so fast I was sure the vertigo would cause him to fall flat on his face, or the other part of him I would have rather seen heading towards the floor. Fortunately, I was spared the act, and he, my derisive laughter, if I'd been mean enough or he'd been sobered enough to appreciate it. With the maw of hell breath now pointed in the opposite direction, I took my own long-awaited one and giggled softly at the prophetic image of him passed out on the laundry room floor, oblivious to even the dust devils, fleeing desperately, the smell, and then some disgruntled police officer checking his ID and finally picking him up off the floor, the dust devils cheering, and into the waiting van of environmental justice. After the shock of a deafening loud crash, he had slammed the glass door, shaking it almost to its foundation. He exited the laundromat, cursing under his toxic breath. I just managed to see him disappear around the corner of the building. I thought that was it. Laundry drying, threat averted, danger past, and then, like a recurring nightmare, I sensed his hand near my privates, and that awful reek of alcohol. He'd snuck back in and was behind me. Still bent over from filling the last dryer, I instantly drew my two-edged dagger from my boot, and in one smooth upward moment sliced the back of his forearm, all the way to the wrist. He began whooping, cursing, spitting, and calling me every name in the book. A crimson ribbon of blood ran from the hilt of the razor-sharp, twin-edged metal blade to drip off the tip on one side and onto the floor, as his blood began running down his arm. A growl deep in his inebriated belly began turning into a long, drawn-out, high-pitched howling scream. I stood there, defiant, my weight distributed evenly on both feet, motionless, ready to cut his throat should he try anything else. Then I moved quickly away, out of reach, his face contorted in pain, his mouth still gaping open. I barely noticed the car in the parking lot, directly in front of the otherwise empty lot. The fuck standing before me, blood dripping from his upper arm to the wrist, had his right hand cradling the other. He hugged his bloody arm close to his body, as if it were his baby. An image of a brand new bottle of cheap-ass whiskey entered my mind. He acted like he was holding on to it for dear life. He was. His previously dirt and sweat-stained white shirt looked like something out of a slasher horror film. Blood seeped like the writhing tentacles of an H.P. Lovecraft Call of Cthulhu novel. His blood spread out in all directions to saturate what little white was still left. In seconds his shirt was soaked crimson. When he dared look at me again, my lips shut tight in a grimace. He had to pass out sometime, I thought. What fright I had felt before was now a seething fury. I heard the sound of the side door opening. I saw from my peripheral vision a woman hurrying her laundry through the all-glass side door. The asshole, through his pain, yelled a last-ditch effort to make himself seem the victim. "I'll kill you, you bitch." I stood firm, holding the dagger up where he could see it, waiting for him to try it again. Momentarily I cringed as a single drop of the fucker's blood dripped into my hand. Not because it was blood, but because it was his blood. Right then, I wanted never to feel anything that belonged to him touching any part of me ever again, especially his breath. Believing he now had a witness, he threatened, "I will call the police and tell them you attacked me." My brow shot upwards and I laughed, though still pissed. With mock trepidation and a complete and total sense of irony, I offered, "Oh no, really? In fact, please do. I think I might have a couple of quarters to spare after all." I guess he didn't find that funny. Then I heard the woman behind him say, "No need, you stupid shit. I saw the entire thing, and I will tell the truth. I saw you put your hands on her. She was only defending herself." He grimaced, and with a quick and almost unnatural twist of his body, maybe he was a lizard after all, fled the scene. and disappeared out and around the corner, this time for good. The Reeker was never heard, seen, or smelled again. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.